Well, hello everybody. Just checking the stream's going to go live. There we go. And hello from South Africa to here we. Anybody else? If you want to comment and write in there, then we can have a chat while we're doing the session. Welcome to Discover Dorico April. If you're in the UK, you're probably hopefully enjoying the probably only 2 days of summer we'll get. I know it's spring, but it feels like summer. If we don't get interrupted by the ice cream van today, then I'll be quite annoyed. But I think he should be here at some point. I hope you've had been visiting some schools and university music departments, so such as Artes in the Netherlands, also City and Islington Sixth Form College in North London, and their music department, who now have Dorico, and also, of course, have been at the Mesa. And we did some live streams in English, and Frank Heckel did some in German from there. Also, if you did see any of our live streams, sorry about the dancing. They told me that we weren't live at that point, and apparently we were. Never mind. Yes. Also, Steinberg has announced some new audio interfaces, so that's what you can see on the screen at the moment. Somebody's saying we don't have sound yet. Let me just check. Yeah, I think hopefully it's okay for everybody. So as usual, on the YouTube videos, you should have hopefully volume settings at the bottom for the YouTube videos. There's also a quality setting. So if you click on the cogwheel, then you can hopefully turn the quality up to something like 720p if it isn't already. And hopefully you should see on my screen at the moment an audio interface, which is one of the new ones from Steinberg. There's a UR-RT2 and an RT4. And as it says, these have Rupert Neve designed transformers. So for all you recording audio files, if you want to switch those, you just can press the button on there and use the new transformers. Also, Cubase Pro 9.5 won an MIPA 2018 Best Recording Software and Apps. In fact, here is a picture of said award from the Mesa. And also, for people interested in Steinberg software, there's a current offer on Wavelab. So until the 26th of April, if you're interested in Wavelab, then there's an offer on for that one as well. Let me close these windows so we don't get interrupted by Facebook at some point. So today, what we're going to be looking at, as usual, things that people have sent me or questions that I've had over the last month. This session will include some MIDI and MusicXML importing hints, tips, and various other things. Some shortcuts for composers that sometimes people miss out. So the idea being, of course, Dorico is probably the first program that you can properly compose into and not have to worry so much about what you have already entered is too difficult to tweak later on. So we'll look at some of those. And also I was sent a marching snare drum little example, which actually initially you go, yeah, no problem. And then you think, oh, hang on, there might be one or two issues. And how would you do that in Dorico? So we'll look at that one as well. So to start off with, unless there's any questions or comments so far on the chat, I don't think so. Yeah, I think everybody's now working. Engela's now with us. So when you're importing an XML, few things that came up that I thought might be useful. So I'm kind of presuming you're probably coming from Cubase or a DAW, although there are 200 plus programs now that can save MusicXML files, and I'm sure there's a vast quantity more that can save a MIDI file. Now, of course, you'll probably want to quantize things in a DAW first. Cubase, for example, is very good at quantizing for lots of things before you export. And if you're using something like Cubase, then for a MusicXML export, you'll want to go to the score view, so Command R or Control R, and then you can export MusicXML from there. So some examples of things and what you might want to do. I have noticed that in a lot of cases, you may also want to check from the DAW you're in that if you add the correct key signature first and that kind of thing, it probably gives us a bit more to go on as to what you want. And maybe you want to check you've got the right clefs and things potentially in the score view. and then then it obviously export the MusicXML file to import it into Dorico. But the first one, I'm just going to import a few files here, and we'll have a look at some of the options. So we'll import one here, which this is the MIDI import options dialog. You can use GM program changes to identify instruments. It depends where your file has come from. Obviously, I think you're probably going to get better results if you have done the file yourself, because obviously you can tweak various things in the DAW before you get to this part. But if you've used sounds that aren't general MIDI, then this top section isn't going to help you very much. If you're using sampled sounds from your MIDI file or in Cubase or with Halion, that kind of thing, this bit's not going to help anyway. So we'll look at some of those options. The split point is just if you have, for example, a piano staff where the MIDI split note number is, where 60 is middle C. So if you need to tweak that one or change that one, then you can do. And then I often tick the preserve note velocities and preserve note positions, just so that we've preserved those from any from the DAW that we were sent it from. So now here's an example of these are some files that I've got. We don't need to worry too much about where or that kind of thing at the moment. But some of the things that I kind of noticed happen from a number of files. This one, amusingly, is now called "I Miss You Double Staves." I labeled it double staves because when we've imported these, for whatever reason, either from the DAW you've come from or for whatever reason, we think this is a double staff instrument when probably it isn't. So how would we fix that? There's also, I've noticed there's some metronome markings at the top here, which we've probably got far too many of because there may have just been a slight change in the DAW, and we probably want to get rid of some of those. So those kind of things, what would we then do? So presuming we now are in Dorico, and we're going to be changing these things in Dorico and not in the DAW you came from. In many cases, I would use setup mode and figure out some of these players. So VN1, VN2, VC1, they're relatively obvious this time. They were violins, 2 cellos, trumpet, tenor sax, and trombone. But Dorico hasn't worked out from these acronyms what it is they were supposed to be. So for each of the players, if you expand the player section here, yes, you could edit the names. And this edit name section would let you change, for example, you could change the singular and the short names to violin and VLN or violin 1 or whatever you needed. And because Dorico isn't sure, it's even potentially flutes. But what I would do in most cases is I would change this and I would do change instrument instead. So if I do change instrument and change that to violin, then that will change this to now be violin. Now you'll notice that the player is still called VN1. And also the part layout over here on the right-hand side is also called VN1. That may well, in some cases, be useful if you still want the same labels, but you want the instrument to be correct. Now that the instrument is correct, then you're more likely to get the right sounds. And potentially, well, also things like the transpositions and those kind of things. So when we look at things like saxophones. So if you want to also change the players, so where the name of the player and the layouts, and that of course is what also displays up here and on the left hand side of the part up here, then you can double click on this section, and if you want to change it, you can also change that to say, for example, violin 1. And that will then change the part layout name, which is the layout name, sorry, in this top left corner, and we'll change it up here, and we'll also change it on the right hand side here. So you might want to change both, but I would say that the change instrument one actually is most useful, especially when you get to things like tenor saxophones and things like that, because the tenor saxophone here, if I go to tenor, he may well not be transposing if it hasn't worked out what the instrument is and that kind of thing, important things you'll need. So I would go to here, and I would do this for all of the instruments. I just work my way down the list and quickly change all of these to be the right instruments, and then you'll get the right labels. You'll get the right labels on the subsequent pages without having to change too much. You'll also get the right sounds. So once you've changed all of the instruments to get the sounds and make sure they're correct, go to play mode, go to the play menu, and you want to do apply default playback template, because now Dorico knows what all of these instruments are supposed to be. Then you can load the default playback template just to reset things and get the playback as you'd want them in Halion, and that will load all of the correct samples. So that will sort out kind of a lot of the options. There are cases, and Roger Corkwell asked on Facebook this week about changing instrument names, where there was a grandstaff instrument he wanted to be labeled something else. So you could start, for example, with a piano, and then you could relabel it. This instrument I'm actually just going to change to show that the double staff here is going to go back to being violin 2 as a single staff, and it's now starting to bracket them correctly as well. But if you had, for example, a double instrument that you wanted to change the name of to something else, so this cello, if you wanted it to be, for example, vibraphone, then you can just change the name, and it will change the name here. There we go. So if you need to, for any other reason, you just want to just change the name, then you can do that. And of course, even though I've reset and I've now got the right sounds for my violins, if you then want to change any of the samples, you can of course come over to your VST instruments, have a look in Halion, and then you can change the individual instruments in here if you want to as well. So for example, for the one I've already changed here, it's using slot 1, so I can find out in Halion and change that if I want to. So kind of some hopefully useful kind of things just to tidy some of those things up regarding which instruments, because if Dorico can't work out from the program name, like I said, if you're using samples, then we might not be able to work out either from the name or the sample number, because there isn't a MIDI number, a program number with that, as to what it is. So that do a change instrument, that will probably sort out most of the things all at the same time, all in the same go. So and a couple of other options that I've got here. So one is that in another version of this file I have, which is a MusicXML version. So what I'll often do is take a Cubase file and export it both as MIDI and as MusicXML. I've got a validation error. You don't need to worry about it. It's often that there's for example, a MIDI program 0 and the range is 1 to 128, so 0 isn't supposed to be allowed. Don't worry about it too much. But again, in this case, even in the MusicXML example, it can't work out what the instruments are supposed to be. So I would still want to, over here, take my number 1 and change that to be violin, because I know where it came from, for example. But also in this one here, now this is from a slightly older version of Cubase, I happen to know. Every time every now and then it thinks there's a key change, which there isn't really, and it's put in an extra clef. And that's actually a problem from some of the older versions of Cubase. If you use 9.5, this shouldn't happen, but some of the older versions you might get this, where you get extra clefs and key signatures. If you don't have the option to update, or you've been given a file by somebody else from another door and you don't have the option to change it, then what I would probably do is use something like the filters. So you could filter, for example, the key signatures. You might want to keep the original one, so I'll just command click that. And now I can press delete, and I filtered out and deleted all of the extra random ones. And you could do the same with clefs, of course, if you wanted to. So if you wanted to select all the clefs, in fact, I'll just do select all, filter out all of the clefs. I'll deselect these ones at the beginning because I want to keep those ones. There we go. So now when I press delete, of course, it'll delete all those extra ones. So sometimes I've found those. I've also found, for example, in the previous file we had here, where you get extra metronome markings and those kind of options, because there's been a slight tempo change somewhere. If they're very slight and you don't actually want them, then again, just use the filters. Filter out the metronome markings, which I've now can't see. In fact, all tempos. There we go. And then I got deselect that one, delete them, so that they'll all disappear. I'd also noticed from some of the other things, let me just quit a couple of these files. Another example I was sent, let me just find the right file. Here we go. And this one will be a MIDI file again. I'll tick all the options, but they may not all be useful at this point. And I noticed on the comments, somebody says, hello from Paris temporarily. Is that because you're leaving very soon, or because you're only in Paris temporarily? And yes, Peter, you could copy and paste the instrument. So when you have you've got the wrong instruments. Peter said in Sibelius he'd copy and paste the MIDI into new staves to get all of the right instruments and playback. But it can be a lot of copying and pasting around then, and you end up with a lot more instruments and then have to delete them. So I thought it's easier just to do an instrument change instead, because then you can use the right instrument. And then you also have the advantage of, because the layout name stays the same as what it was imported, you can tell if you've got a kind of reference point to see if you've got them all the right way around. Now, in this particular piece I was sent now, this is a MIDI file I've opened. I wasn't necessarily particularly told what some of the issues were, but I noticed a couple that I thought I'd point out. So, for example, here we've got a rhythm which thinks it wants to be a tuplet, but actually probably doesn't really. In Dorico, what you can do is select just the tuplet number here. So I've got just the number 3 selected. And if I delete that, then it's only going to delete that one, leave most of the notes in. In this case, if I now just select the note and press minim, then, well, sorry, over here, of course, half note or minim, I just press number 7. Then that kind of thing can often just be the easiest way to tidy them up, to delete the tuplets. However, in some cases like this one down here, there's often, at the moment, no easy way of doing that. If you delete the tuplet bracket, that's not really going to help you, because that's still not the rhythm you wanted. In this particular piece, I spotted that there was the same tuplet over here, and to be honest, re-entering those tuplets or copying and pasting the tuplets in is probably going to be the quickest way to solve this particular case. And I'm just using Alt up and down to move those tuplets diatonically into the right places. So in some cases, yes, they are a bit annoying to sort out those kind of things with tuplets. More information on those, it'll be clever in the future, hopefully. So watch this space, or literally, actually, watch this space. But nothing just yet on that. Of course, you've also got some enharmonic changes of problems here, and you can select a note and you can press Alt and plus and minus to move that note and change that note enharmonically. I just realized I'm not using my little mouse pose options to show you my keyboard shortcuts. So let's turn on keystrokes. So Alt equals and minus, and you'll see that on your keyboard they hopefully have a plus and minus symbol. Then that will change individual notes, but that's not going to be the quickest way to do it, because there's a lot even in this bar that need to change from G sharps to A flats and from D sharp to E flat. So I'm going to do select all, and I'm going to again use filters for this. Now, there's a filter option here, notes by pitch. You can see I've set a shortcut for this because I was going to use it a fair bit today. So just firstly, to do that, if you go to the preferences, so I'm going to go to Dorico preferences, or I think on a PC it's in the edit menu. Then you can go to key commands, and if you look for the filter options, there's all sorts of filters that you could set shortcuts for, one of which that I'm going to use at the moment is notes by pitch. And then you select this option up here on the right hand side for where it says press shortcut. You press the shortcut you want to use, you press the add key command, and it will add it to the list. And that was what I've already done there. So I can now just press that shortcut that I've set, and I get this dialog for filter notes by pitch. So in here, I could say, for example, I would like any of the G sharps, and I don't want a particular octave, so I'm going to untick this box. And then I can, if I press the add button here, then it will add it into my list here of pitches to filter. I'm also going to add into their D sharps. So I've got G sharps and D sharps now. So for both of these options here, I'm now going to press select. So it will select all of those pitches. And now I can use the option to change all of those to the note above. So they're now A flats and E flats instead. So again, that kind of thing. Now, hopefully, in a lot of cases, actually, when you import this, especially probably if you use MusicXML, and you put a key signature in, then hopefully you get the right options. But there's no saying necessarily where your files come from, which processes it's been through, and sometimes those kind of enharmonic changes do need to happen. So there you go. The useful thing here is that in the dialog we're using here, which again, for anybody who needs to know, select all, sorry, I didn't select all, is over here in filter and notes by pitch. And I set a shortcut for that. And then you've got a list here. So if you need to, you can clear the list and you can remove selected items from here, and you can kind of build up a bunch of options. And if you only need to filter specific octaves, you can do that. But this is it's quite a useful filter list for specific pitches. Also, I found in some cases I've been sent files which were imported from MusicXML or MIDI. However, they're now in Dorico, and people have been working on them and then said, "Oh, I found this issue, and what do I do about it?" So, for example, this piece has been worked on a bit in Dorico now. It did come from Cubase, but in some of the instruments, we've got different rhythms displaying. So the trumpet, for example, here is not displaying the same as the tenor sax and the trombone, and we've got different rhythms. So one thing I initially thought is, oh, well, I'll select this one here, and I'll go to Edit and Reset Appearance, and nothing happens. And I thought, so then I thought, yes, we need to check in the notation options. So in the notation options here, we're in the note grouping section, and we need to scroll down a bit down here and look for in fact, there's all sorts of options in here, but the one we want is patterns that cross the half bar. So I'm going to press apply to apply that option to split at the half bar beat boundary. And there you go. Now this one has changed. Now, just to go back, in case you're doing this and somebody's following this along, what you might find, in fact, if I just go right back, make sure, there we go. What you might find is you go into notation options and you do split at the half bar and you press apply and close, and then nothing happens. And you go, oh, why did nothing happen? It's because you need to reset appearance. And I had already reset appearance on that. Effectively, it's a bit like forced duration is still turned on. But it's more likely in this case that the file, when it was imported, probably via MusicXML, has set that rhythm specifically, and is therefore causing problems in this bar. But it's that kind of two-stage step. It doesn't matter which way around you do them, but you need to do both stages to make sure they reset. So it may be that now you've done the whole piece, that actually you want to select everything and do reset appearance. So for anybody else who's got those rhythms, for example, up here in the violins, it would also change those for you, which might be useful. You also may find, of course, that you want the beaming to change. So, for example, here they're beamed differently. So you can select one or more of these options, and then right-click, and in the beaming section, use Reset Beaming, and that will reset that one for you. So again, in this piece, you might want to select all and do beaming, reset beaming, because then it will also change your strings up here and everybody else as well. So a couple of options where you might get run into these cases. If you're doing this from the beginning of the MusicXML import, before you import a file via MusicXML, check in our preferences, or your preferences, what the MusicXML import options are. So, for example, stem directions. If you've already worked on the stem directions in another program, and you want us to import those stem directions because you've worked on them, then do that. The beam grouping options and the note durations and those kind of things, depending on whether they're turned on or not. See, it says that this one can impact it as if the notes were input using forced durations. So in some cases, you kind of, if you've not realized, or as I said, in my case, the file was imported by somebody else and then I've been looking at it. In case you missed it, the ice cream van's just gone past. So that puts me off completely. Ice cream time. So if you need to reset them, then there are options. But at the beginning, it's probably a good idea to check this dialog first for the options that are being imported when Dorico looks at your MusicXML file, and use those first. But like I said, here we've changed the rhythms, we've changed the beaming to match what we actually wanted. Just quickly checking the comments to see if there's anything confusing I've said or wrong. Hello from Paris and Canada. Everybody's temporarily on holiday. And I wish I still was too. No, that's all okay. Okay, so we can carry on with that. There are some of the composer tip type things then. So I'm just going to use this file. At the beginning, let's use this trombone part. Oh, actually, one last thing on this file. I noticed in this particular file as well that the tenor sax, for example, if I select the tenor sax here, in the part, he was only transposing, if I flick between them, by a tone. So the tenor sax transposition also wasn't correct. And that's another thing that the over here, the change instrument option will fix. So tenor saxophone. So it didn't look like anything changed, but the name will be slightly different. And now he's transposing correctly. So now we have everything correct. And actually now the short names are correct as well. You see when it's been imported, the short names have come in the same as the long names. So that's again another thing that just doing a change instrument will fix those kind of things for you. So anyway, the composer type things and shortcuts and things. So in my trombone part down here, I'm going to put some notes. So we'll just have, in fact, I'm going to leave a rest first, put a couple of Cs in, put some Cs in this bar, and then let's move a couple of these just so we can tell exactly what's going on. So here we have some notes. It's not a very exciting piece, but there you go. I've also noticed there's a label at the bottom. Let's just move that because it's going to get in my way for a minute. Here we have some notes. Now, there's a number of things that you could do. Let's say this, it's just a rhythmic idea. It's just an idea of some pitches, a note row that you, as a composer, you want to have a play around with. So I'm going to select these notes here, and kind of here's a few different options depending on which shortcuts and in which order you do things. So the default is, and let's just put our panel back on the left-hand side. These are all crotchets. If I just press 5, then I'll get quavers, and you get a rest between each one. That, in some cases, is what you want, and is probably what you expect from using another notation program. But you might also, let's just undo that. If you press insert mode, so press I, or if you're using the mouse, it's this little option over here. It toggles it on and off. Then when you press 5 or press quaver or eighth or whatever you'd like to call it, then it will shorten these notes, but instead of putting rests in between, it will also pull the other notes to the right of it. And this only acts in one voice, and I've only got one voice here, one rhythm. But it's pulling those notes left, so it's removing any of the spaces from those. You may also have seen when we've done this before, if insert mode is on and you press the rhythm dot, then it will make all of those notes longer by the rhythm dot, so half as long again. And if I don't have insert mode on, then it will give you a dotted rhythm. So 2 options there. Let's just put these back as they were. There's a few other options. So for example, if I take one or more note, and if I press, obviously you'll know if you press Alt and up and down, it will change the pitch diatonically. If you press Alt left and right, so if I press Alt left, then it will move all of those notes left by the amount that's in our rhythm grid down here. So just in this bottom corner down here where we've got the rhythm grid options. And you can choose a different option down there. So if you want to move everything by crotchets, quarter notes, then you can change that. There's also a shortcut. So if you just keep looking down here, then you can use Alt and the square brackets on your keyboard to change the rhythm grid options. So again, using shortcuts, and actually it's all using Alt at this point, you can use Alt and change those to be quarter notes. And then when you use Alt left, they'll move by quarter notes. If I change this back to be eighth notes or quavers, then when I move them, then they'll move by eighth notes or quavers. So this is Alt left and right to move those notes. Now, when I get left far enough to get to this single note, as it was, the first C, and I press Alt left again, then some strange things happen. I had 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've got now this. This is changed to a quaver, and if I press Alt left again, then it's removing it. So this is because it's the normal mode is override. It's overriding those. It's moving my notes left and overriding anything that was there. I'm just going to undo this so you can see it more clearly. Now, if I do this with insert mode on, now when I press Alt left, you'll see I've now got a quaver here and I've got a quaver here. So it's split that crotchet, sorry, quarter note whichever way you'd like to look at it, and it's put half of it over here. And then if I press left again, then it split it over here. Now, because it had already split it into 2 quavers, they're now displaying as 2 quavers because it had split the note up and it's now moved them as each part of the step to the right. So, it's another option. It's effectively moving those notes kind of in time, but it's not deleting the other things. It's kind of pushing its way past and saying, you get to the back of the queue. Now, I'm just going to undo this again so we can do some other options. Which we get to, that one will do. So that was Alt left and right. Now, if you do Alt Shift left and right, so if I do Alt and Shift and left, then all of those notes become quavers, 8th notes. So it's the same as if I press the shortcut for that. But what it's actually doing, if we just change one of these, so we've got different rhythms, then we'll see what's going on. So Alt Shift left, sorry, without insert mode on, Alt Shift left. So now it's shortening those notes by the length of the rhythm grid. So again, we've still got down here 8th notes. Now, this is going to start to go, what? In your head, probably. And what I recommend is you start playing with some of these options to see what happens when you do them, because I think this is one of those things where by doing it, you'll start to understand what's going on. So again, Alt Shift left again, Alt Shift left again. Now, they're not getting any shorter because this is the shortest rhythm option. I'm going to undo. If I have insert mode turned on and I press Alt Shift left, then they're all getting shorter, but it's also messing with time. So that's a different option again. If I don't have insert mode turned on and I use Alt, Shift, and Command or Control, depending on whether you're on Mac or PC, then you can also shorten these, and they will keep halving the note values. So press undo. If I do that with insert mode on, then it will halve all of those, but also, of course, pull all the other rhythms in from elsewhere in the bar, elsewhere in the piece. So there's multiple options here depending on the combination of shortcuts. So you've got Alt left, you've got Alt Shift left or right, and you've got Alt Shift and Command left and right. And you'll find some of these options are going to be up here. So for example, edit duration, you've got some of the shortcuts here in the menu as well for halving and doubling and lengthening and shortening notes. So again, it's just a case where you can start off with one rhythm and not worry, be quite happy that depending on how you tweak it, which shortcuts you're using, and by using them, you'll get more used to them and what they can do. You can then play with rhythms and lengthen and shorten things just simply with shortcuts, and then of course play them back and see how they sound. So it's the same with with anywhere else. So here we've got a rhythm here, and if I try and if I use some of the shortcuts, and then I can double note values, I can halve note values. This is also sometimes really useful when you're editing MIDI files, because sometimes the notes that have been imported are just all actually slightly too short or slightly too long, and what you want to do is make them all match the rhythm grid over here, or what you want to do is double the note values of something if they've all come in as 16th and they're supposed to be 8ths, for example. And sometimes using those shortcuts is going to be a very good and easy way to get you to where you need to be for that. So like I said, play with those, because I don't think my explanation is the best. And by actually doing it, you'll start to understand how some of those shortcuts work. And also, it's a bit muscle memory, I find, I know what the shortcut is, but unless I look down at the actual keys, then describing it is more difficult. Your muscle memory will go, oh yeah, to shorten something or halve it, I use this shortcut, and and it will become much more familiar to you. My last example today is going to be a snare drum example, which I have here. Now, I'm just going to put it down the bottom of the screen out of the way a bit. You might think, well, there's nothing particularly complicated about that. It's a snare drum example, and it's one where they show which hand you're hitting the snare with by putting the note head above or below the line. So how would you do this in Dorico? So I'm going to do a new piece. And I'll move some of these others out of the way as well. So let's just move some of these windows around, get rid of that one and that one and that one, because then I can move this one up a bit. And what I'm going to do is just bring it up slightly so that I can see the snare drum example underneath it. Oops, the right window. There we go. There we go. So I want to do this one. So what you might have thought, and to be honest, I probably did when I first looked at this, is right, it's for a snare drum. So I'll type snare. I've got marching snare drum one line. Could be marching snare drums and snare drum. Let's presume it's a marching snare drum one line. Add one of those. And this is the wrong answer. So this marching snare drum, I can put notes on here. I'm just going to press Y and put a note on there. But if you use, for example, Alt up and down, you can't move it to above or below the staff, and there's no options here. And of course, importantly, over here, you can't edit the percussion kit. You can edit the percussion playing techniques. Maybe you could do it that way, because we'll use playing techniques in a minute. The other option you might have tried to do, if I come into here, is you might have said, actually, I want to use the standard snare drum change. And that is basically exactly the same, in that if you select this note, you cannot move this up or down without adding other playing techniques. What I would probably do in this case, I'm just going to delete this one and start again. What I would probably do is actually use this create empty kit. Now, in this case, yes, you probably could do it with the playing techniques for the other instruments, but we'll use this one for a second. And now I'm going to press this plus button down here on the left because I've got 5 lines here with no instruments. So now I'm going to add my snare to here. I'll add a snare drum. And here we've got a snare drum and press close. So now, again, if I try and add a note to here and press Y, then I've got a pitch. I can't move it up or down, and that's the problem. I need to be above and below the staff at this point. So what I'm going to do is edit my percussion kit. And for this snare drum, what I'm going to do is edit percussion playing techniques. What I need is I need one below and one above. So here's the natural one here. I'm going to say here's below, and then I'm going to add another one. So add playing technique, and I'd like another natural one, but there isn't one. So I'll say natural harmonic will do. Natural harmonic 1, and I'll put that one above on the staff position option. So now I've got one below and I've got one above. Press OK. So the note I initially entered here is below. I entered that using Y. I can also press a note on my MIDI keyboard, and it doesn't matter if I press D or E. Now, in my case, as you may know from earlier sessions I've done, but just in case, in my preferences, I don't tend to use staff position. I tend to use the use percussion map for percussion. So my snare drum is going to be 2 octaves below middle C, almost. It's the D and the E keys. I will explain the difference why. So in this particular piece, if I was to do this now, what I can do if I don't have a MIDI keyboard is say, oh, I need to put in, this is in 2/4, and it has an upbeat of 0.5. There we go. I'm just going to turn off my signposts, so I don't need to see that. So now I've got my snare drum. So what I can do now is I can press Y, and I can input a pitch on the snare drum. Let's make it the short pitch I need for the beginning of this piece. And I can also press Alt up, and I can get snare drum natural harmonic. So that now when I enter a pitch with Y, then I'll get a note above. So I've got one below and one above. All good so far. However, the continuously doing Alt up and down to get the snare drum and the natural harmonic, and if you keep pressing Alt up, you also get the cross stick and the rim because they're still defined. I didn't undefine them. It can be a little bit annoying between the two. So what I thought would make it slightly simpler is if you go into play mode and you edit the percussion map. We're using the general MIDI one, and because a snare drum in particular normally has acoustic snare on note 38, which is the D I mentioned, nearly 2 octaves below middle C, and it has an electric snare on 40, which is E, then I could change this one over here. And instead of being natural down here, I'm going to say that it's actually natural harmonic 1. Apply. And the reason for this is that when I go back to write mode now, when I want to enter a note that's above, I can press E, and I'll just enter some more notes here. So I'm just copying the piece that's below, so you can see hopefully what's going on. And then when I want to enter a pitch below, I just press D. So I've now got a pitch above and a pitch below, and I've got 2 individual notes for doing that. So let's enter a couple more of those like that. And then, so now when I want to do the tuplet section, for example, I don't have to do all the complicated switching Alt up and down, I can just say, I'd like that note value, I'd like some tuplets, please, and I can just do, and then I can turn the tuplets off to enter that note, and then put the tuplets back on for that bit. But now I've entered the notes, and it is quicker on a MIDI keyboard. You can use Alt up and down if you're sat on a train using a laptop, though. Now, there are also some little grace notes in here, so I'm just going to put those in as well. And that one is below. So again, I'm using the shortcut for below for that one. And there's one, oh, there's one just in here, which is above. Oops. There we go. Now, I pressed E for above, and that one didn't happen. It's not currently possible to enter that one in the right place. So once you've entered those grace notes, you will have to press Alt up. Alt Shift up to move it. So for any of these existing notes, Alt up isn't going to do anything. Alt Shift up will move them if you need to switch them over. And that's the same for these achakaturas or apogiaturas. In my case, they do have slashes on them. So there we go. Oh, and also, silly, I didn't enter the tremolos either. So from our repeat structures over here, we've got tremolos. So if you want to enter tremolos, then you can do that. And there's one there, and there's one there. Now, also, I noticed in this particular example that they had a bass clef at the beginning, and I'm not going to change to a bass clef because I presume that's more likely just whatever software was used to generate this in the first place. Maybe it wasn't capable of doing a percussion clef, so I think I'm going to leave it in this case. There is a repeat bar line, I suppose, if you want the repeat bar line. There's also the stem directions. Now, there's a couple of options here for stem directions. Now, if I was to carry on with this piece here, so let's just put in a few more notes. Then you see, as I've entered this note here, the stem directions for this section have flipped. So initially, what I would say is, don't worry. At the instant that a note is in the wrong direction, wrong stem direction, I would enter all the notes and then worry about how you want them all to look. I think you've probably got two options then as well. One is that you could go into setup mode for percussion and edit the percussion kit. And because of the type of percussion kit I've done, which was this new kind of green one instead of the old blue ones, and I'll just make this dialog a bit smaller so you can see. So what you could do is say that my snare drum, I want to be stems down, for example. But what you'll find will happen is you'll do that and press apply, and nothing happens. And that's because this drum set tick box needs to be ticked as well. If you tick that and press apply, then it will follow the stem directions. Now, that might be what you want, but in this particular case, it's also changed my tiny notes here. And I don't want those to change because in the example, original example here, they are still up. So actually, in this particular case, what I would probably do is leave that as it was. And occasionally, once I've entered everything, occasionally, if I find something that's not right, I can click on the beam for these notes here and maybe just force the stem down on those particular notes. And that might actually be quicker and easier than changing these to force them stem up later. It depends how many there are in each case. So I'll kind of, it depends on your example as to exactly which way you want to do those. But there you go. It looked like it was initially going to be this is really easy, but actually there's a couple of kind of gotchas or caveats and things in there. So I thought that might be a quick useful example to show. I'm just going to check the comments again for a second. The font I was using, in that particular piece, I can't remember. It was more of a pop soul type piece, so I think they were more likely to be using Arial. If that was the one I was using, because I think all the other files I've used have been standard, but it wasn't one of my files, so I'd have to check. The trick with insert mode is to remember to turn it off after you've used it. It is indeed. And insert mode, it lights up over here. So, but when you also have the caret on any instrument, then you will see chevrons at the top and the bottom of the caret as well. Of course, if you're editing, then you don't have the caret on, then you might not notice that. So this bit on the left will notify you if insert mode is on or off. To save time in the percussion, I'd enter simple note values and then change the notes need to be dotted afterwards. Yes. So I think what John's saying there is, for example, if you set this to 8th note quaver, whatever you'd like, and enter a bunch of notes and need them to be dotted, you can then select them afterwards and press rhythm dot to do that. Yes, absolutely. I've often done that. In actual fact, in a lot of cases, you can enter all of the notes you want of any pitch, sorry, any duration. So you could say, actually, in this example here, I know what I'm going to need from, roughly here is I'm going to need some up and some down and in this order. And then, of course, using the example options we had before, if you've got insert mode on, you can then come in and change all of these to be whatever it is you need them to be. And also, as somebody pointed out on Facebook to me the other day, also doesn't matter if you then have tuplets anywhere, because tuplets over bar lines and that kind of thing aren't a problem. So I had a MIDI file sent to me, which was, which one was it? There was a quick example I was sent, which did very similar to this, where once it's imported, I'm not entirely sure what the original needs to be, but this particular example here, when I had to look at it, I thought, well, to start off with, I'd probably change this to what looks like a bass clef instrument. Not sure which one, so we'll just say it can be a trombone for now. And then from this example here, if I double click with my cursor to start the caret and turn on insert mode and press delete, then it will pull the notes in to be the beginning of the bar. And you'll notice here, there's a tuplet splitting over the bar line. And if I keep going, it's now fine, and it'll sort it all out. So you don't have to kind of worry too much. Now, I'm still not entirely sure what this piece is supposed to be. I think maybe it needed to be quantized first. But I know, of course, at least you can play it now and find out. But yeah, the important thing there is that insert mode can be very useful to tidy things up, and also for note input, because this rhythm here, you could just enter with the stem directions in the right way and then figure it out if you so wish. And that's the important thing composition-wise, is I think you don't need to worry about the exact time meter or anything else at the beginning. You can put all of the pitches in and then suddenly go, oh, actually, this needs to be, half time and need to double everything, or the reverse. Everything needs to be suddenly shortened by half. And that's a very easy thing to do, and it will figure all of those out. So I think that's probably I should probably stop waffling today. So there are some events coming up. There's some Dorico events coming up in Italy and Portugal. If you have a look on the Facebook pages, then you can find out more details about those. If you're going to the MMA conference at Eton in May, then come and say hello. I will be at that one with a couple of Steinberg colleagues. The next Discover Dorico session will be on Wednesday, the 23rd of May. That's the plan. And also, I'd say if you're attached to a music department or an organization, a music organization, and you'd like to arrange a Dorico event, then let me know. If there's something we can do, there's a number of composer organizations and various other organizations that we've done events for and we'd like to do events for. And also, at the moment I'm visiting various, as I said, schools and universities and showing them what they can do, especially composition wise, with Dorico. So if you'd like those kind of things, then get in touch. And of course, if you'd like to see something particular in one of these sessions, then please email me on Discover Dorico, which is all one word, Discover Dorico at steinberg.de, and then we can hopefully look at some of those things in another session. So thank you for joining this one. The video is available, of course, to watch online later. So if you want to go over anything again, then you can do. And hopefully that was all very, very helpful. And let me know what you'd like to see next time, please. Thank you. Bye.